Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at how people judge other people's actions, and specifically when things are kind of uncertain.
Yeah.
We don't have all the information. So to get into this, we've got this really fascinating research article. It's from the world of cognitive science, and it dives into how we make these moral judgments when we don't have all the facts. And the interesting part is it looks like we might be judging other people based on whether or not we think we would act the same way.
It's very interesting, very thought-provoking.
Yeah, for sure. So this paper is called How Likely Is It That I Would Act the Same Way? Modeling Moral Judgment During Uncertainty.
I like it.
I feel like we're going to learn some things about ourselves today.
Yeah, definitely.
So to study this, they used a combo of fictional scenarios, these little stories they call vignettes, and then also some real-life-like economic games.
Interesting. So the vignettes, I'm guessing, are kind of setting up a situation and you have to react to that situation.
Exactly. And they're really ambiguous on purpose. So they present a situation where someone's doing something, could be judged as good or bad, but we don't know all the reasons why.
So like imagine a vignette about a student who misses class. And that's it. Just they miss class. We don't know why.
So like immediately my brains go like, okay, did they oversleep?
Yeah.
Were they sick? Are they just being lazy?
Right. Do they have a family emergency?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
All this stuff.
Yeah. That's where it gets really interesting because they had people read these vignettes and then they would rate the trustworthiness of the person.
Oh, wow.
So in that example, how trustworthy is that student, even though we don't know why they miss?
Right. You're already making a judgment call based on very limited information.
It's like real life, right?
It is, yeah. It's very true to life, I think. So what they found is that our judgments in these uncertain situations are really influenced by our own personal beliefs about what's right and wrong. And they call this the self-likelihood model.
Self-likelihood model, okay. Well, basically it says that when we don't have all the information and we're in that uncertain situation, we judge others by subconsciously asking ourselves, would I have done the same thing?
So it's not just like what they did.
Right.
It's like, would I have done it?
You're kind of putting yourself in their shoes, running that simulation and seeing if it aligns with what you would have done.
And I can think of times where like I've been more understanding of someone's actions because I'm like, I would have done that too.
It's a very human tendency, and it's a surprisingly powerful predictor of how we judge others.
So how did they actually test this?
Well, so in one of their studies, they had people read a bunch of different vignettes, each one with some ambiguous scenario like that. And they had them rate how trustworthy the person seemed.
Okay, so that's their initial judgment?
Right, just based on the very limited information.
What happened next?
So then after that, they were given a list of possible explanations. So for example, with the student who missed class, they might say, well, maybe they were sick, maybe they had a family emergency, maybe they were just lazy, who knows?
Okay.
And then for each of those explanations, they had to answer two questions.
Okay.
One, would you yourself have skipped class in this exact situation?
Okay.
And two, what percentage of other people do you think would have skipped?
So it's like what I would do versus the social norm.
Exactly. Yeah, so trying to see, is it more important what you personally think is right or wrong, or what you think society deems acceptable?
Interesting. So which one was more important?
So what they found is that people's judgments were more closely linked to their own reported likelihood of acting similarly than to what they thought was typical behavior.
So it really is about what I would do, not what I think most people would do.
It seems that way. Even when judging others, we're often looking inward. And comparing their actions to our own internal compass.
So we're talking about how we decide what's right and wrong, especially when we don't have all the information. And as we were just discussing, there's this really interesting idea called the self-likelihood model, which suggests that we judge other people based on whether or not we would have done the same thing in their situation.
Right. We put ourselves in their shoes, see if we would have acted similarly.
So to test this idea even further, they used not only those fictional vignettes, but they also used these economic games. So let's talk about those.
All right, let's do it.
What kind of games were they?
Well, so in one study, they had people play this two-player economic game.
Okay.
And in the game, they had to make a series of decisions about whether to act selfishly or generously towards their partner. Are you going to be greedy or are you going to be nice?
Yeah, like what kind of person are you?
Yeah, exactly.
So do they know anything about their partner?
That's the thing. They only had partial information.
Okay.
They knew their partner's choice, but not the specifics of the situation, which could have influenced that choice. All their backstory, the pressures they might have been under, we just don't know.
And I bet they were trying to see if people judged more harshly when their partner did something they themselves wouldn't have done.
Exactly.
Right.
They wanted to see if those self-likelihood judgments played out in a more, dynamic setting.
Right, where there's real consequence. And did they have them, also try to predict, what other people would do?
Yeah, to make things even more interesting, they asked them to predict what percentage of other people would have made the same choices as their partner.
So that social norm.
Exactly. So trying to separate out, would I do that versus would most people do that?
Okay, so what did they find?
Well, the results were actually pretty clear. People's judgments about their partner's trustworthiness were more closely tied to their own reported likelihood acting the same way. It wasn't so much about what was socially acceptable.
It's about me.
Yeah, it was more about whether it aligned with their own internal moral compass. So even in these dynamic situations, it still seems to be the case that we're holding people to our own personal standards.
So did they test this against other theories of moral judgment?
Yes, they did. They wanted to make sure that their model held up against other competing explanations.
Like what?
So one theory is the expectation violation model, which basically says we judge people more harshly when they do something we don't expect.
That makes sense. We like predictability.
Exactly. We like things to be consistent. And when people violate our expectations, it can be jarring.
Right.
So to test this, they actually tweaked the game a little bit.
Well,
they had people play multiple rounds with the same partner.
So you can learn their patterns.
Exactly. You start to get a sense of, okay, this person's always selfish, or this person's always generous.
Or somewhere in between.
Right. And then during each round, they had to predict how their specific partner would act. So not just what most people would do, but what this particular person they've been interacting with would do.
Okay.
This helped really isolate that expectation violation aspect, because now you can see.
How much their actual choice deviated from what you thought they were going to do.
So self-likelihood versus expectation violation.
It's a showdown.
Which one won?
Well, drum roll, please. Self-likelihood still won. It was a better predictor of people's judgments, even if they went against what you expected.
It's still about whether or not I would have done it.
Yeah, it seems to come back to that personal standard.
And so it's not just if they're being weird, it's if I relate to what they're doing.
It's about that relatability, that shared understanding.
It's so interesting. So they also compared it to consequentialist theory, which I think is all about the outcomes.
Yeah, consequentialism is all about the ends justifying the means.
Right. So good action, good outcome.
Exactly. It doesn't matter why you did it as long as it led to something good. So to test this, they again modified the game to make the consequences super clear.
So each round now had these two specific scenarios, and each scenario had a clear payoff for both players.
Okay, so it's not just selfish or generous anymore.
Right. It's if you choose A, then you get X and your partner gets Y.
So you know exactly what's going to happen.
Exactly. Very concrete outcomes.
So did the results favor that consequentialist view?
Nope. Self-likelihood still reigns supreme.
Really?
Yeah, even when they knew the exact consequences. Their judgments were still more driven by whether they themselves would have made the same choice.
That's so interesting.
So it seems like across the board, our internal compass really is a driving force.
It's like the dominant force. So they didn't just stick to trustworthiness, though, right?
No, they wanted to see if this applied to other kinds of judgments as well. So in their next study, they looked at fairness.
Oh, fairness. That's a big one.
Yeah.
Huge. How do we decide what's fair?
Right. And it often involves considering multiple perspectives, weighing different interests.
Right.
It's a very nuanced judgment.
Yeah. So how do they test that?
So they actually used that same modified economic game where the consequences were clearly defined. But instead of asking about trustworthiness, they asked people to rate the fairness of their partner's choices.
So same game, different question.
Exactly.
Did they find the same thing?
You bet. The results were remarkably consistent.
Oh, wow.
People's judgments about fairness were, again, more influenced by their own self-reported likelihood.
Wow. So even when we're trying to be fair.
Yeah, even when we're trying to be objective, it seems like
it's still about me.
That personal sense of what we ourselves would do creeps in.
So before we wrap up, though, I wanted to revisit something you said earlier.
Okay.
You mentioned that this research has some big implications of how we can be more understanding and compassionate towards other people.
Right.
So how do we do that?
Well, I think it starts with shifting our mindset from one of judgment to one of curiosity.
Oh, so instead of like jumping to conclusions about someone,
Yeah,
we should try to be more curious.
Like, what if instead of assuming the worst, we approach these situations with a genuine desire to understand where they're coming from?
Yeah. Like trying to see the world through their eyes, even if we don't agree with their choices.
Yeah, I mean, remember that saying, everyone is fighting a battle you know nothing about.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
It's so true, though, right?
It is.
You just never know what someone else is going through,
Yes.
what kind of pressures they're under.
And I think even if we ultimately disagree with their actions, that attempt to understand can help us be more empathetic.
It really can. It's not about condoning bad behavior. It's about recognizing that motivations are complex. We all make mistakes, and sometimes those are driven by factors we can't see.
Right, so it's like giving people the benefit of the doubt, just like we'd want them to do for us.
Right, we all want grace. So we should extend that to others as well.
And I think it's also about being more aware of our own biases, because we all have them.
We all do, yeah.
We can't escape the fact that our experiences and our values shape how we see the world, how we judge other people.
Absolutely, and sometimes those biases can lead us astray.
Oh, yeah.
Make us judge others unfairly.
So any tips for becoming more aware of our own biases?
You know, I think one simple but really powerful strategy is to just pause before you make a judgment. Take a beat and ask yourself, am I letting my own personal baggage cloud my perception here?
Like, take a step back. Look at the bigger picture. And then another tip would be to actively seek out diverse perspectives.
Right. Talk to people who are different from you, who have different backgrounds, different viewpoints.
Get out of my echo chamber.
Exactly, because it's so easy to get stuck in those echo chambers. Everyone agrees with you all the time.
Everyone's just reflecting my own beliefs right back at me.
Right. But stepping outside that comfort zone, exposing yourself to different ways of thinking, it can be transformative. It helps you see the world in a new light.
And hopefully that leads to better judgments.
Yes, more nuanced, more compassionate, more understanding.
This has been such a great deep dive.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it.
I feel like I'm walking away with a whole new framework for understanding how I judge people. And, more importantly, how I can do it better.
That's the goal. We can always be improving.
So maybe if we all embrace that question, would I have done the same thing? We might find ourselves in a more understanding and compassionate world.
I think so too.